looking forward to this chat, a nice 20-minute chat on the money, UK-India, navigating global macroeconomic dynamics. By the way, I haven't looked at the cricket score, so don't tell me, because I think it might put me in a bad mood. But I gather Australia are batting, but that's all I need to know. But no one's saying anything, which is probably a good thing. Thank you all. Sanjay, great to see you. General Partner, Sovereign Investments. Saif Malik, CEO, UK and Regional Head Client Coverage, UK and Europe Standard Chartered. Vaishali Shroff, Partner, Simpson Ventures. Given wonderful panelists, this panel is called Navigating Global Macroeconomic Dynamics. It's the sort of panel I love, because I'm a real macro guy at Bloomberg. I love talking about macro. So this is my dream sort of panel. So Vaishali, kick it off. What are the global macroeconomic, let's call them challenges, and then we'll come to the opportunities that stem from the macroeconomic background. What are they? What are the challenges right now from a macroeconomic standpoint, from your perspective, the VC perspective?
So I'm going to quote one number, which is the growth piece. When you look at the IMF, the growth is set to fall. And I think if you want to impact growth, you've got to look at ideas of change. You can't just stay in the same legacy space. You've got to change. So from the VC perspective, the idea of funding innovation is very important. So at Simsan Ventures, just to correct you, I'm not a partner. I'm part of the founding team of Simsan Ventures. So we've set up this fund, and it's to solve those issues that you find with growth. So typically you'd say growth in the public markets through, I guess, the market cap of a specific company. Now, when you look at those companies, they start at a certain place. There'll be a seed at some point. They will require funding, and then they grow to the point where they list. So we are looking at the crux of it, the root. So when the business starts, so early stage investing, I think that's where the sweet spot is, where you actually need to bring the idea of funding, smart capital, to then grow these companies, to then impact the growth which affects the global macroeconomic scale.
Yeah. So so the macroeconomic background is how it's like chicken and egg, isn't it?
Correct.
And what is the chicken and what's the egg here?
I wish I could tell you.
Yeah.
Because you have chicken and egg. It could be the either way around.
Yes.
Whether it's the funding piece, whether it's a business that has funding and then requires smart capital, vice versa. And it also includes technology. So Simsan focuses on technology investing. So we look at deep technologies, we look at fintech, which I know you want to talk about in more detail.
Definitely.
And the point here is that if you have technology, you need funding to be able to build the solution sometimes. And then vice versa. When you've got the solution and it's called an MVP, a minimum viable product, you need more funding to be able to grow it. So that's the chicken and egg situation.
Yeah. Sanjay, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, how are you feeling?
Feeling good.
From a macroeconomic standpoint?
For
what are the challenges?
The world at large. I think the world at large, I mean, we're basically in a mode of deglobalization. So I think the challenges coming out of that, frankly, are that, I mean, at least from our perspective, I think having more resilient and sustainable supply chains is a big issue now, generally, across the board, at a global level. I think mobility of people, that's another issue. I think trade could get impacted. So I think globally there are challenges that are coming out of a world that is actually getting a bit segregated and fragmented rather than the so-called global order. So I think those are the kind of challenges that are there. And of course, we'll come to the India part later, but India could be a part of the solution of quite a few of these. We also need help, but we could also be a part of the solution.
Yeah. In a fragmented world, though, Sanjay, how do we as entrepreneurs, how do we adapt in a world that, as you say, seems to be fragmenting?
As entrepreneurs, I think I agree with what she was saying, that I think shortage of capital is clearly one. I mean, even the capital flows today are getting a little bit hampered in a way, right? We're seeing that, capital is not automatically going to China, for example, and then they're obviously constraining supply chains. So I think for entrepreneurs, the opportunity is very domestic for everywhere, right? At least for the Indian entrepreneurs, there is no bigger and better opportunity than the market in India itself. So I don't think entrepreneurs get impacted that much. as long as there is capital available. And, we're a rather capital or saving-starved economy, so we need capital to come from the West. And I think that is pouring into India right now. So I don't think that many challenges, except that it's a different world. So for entrepreneurs, the big challenges will be disruption that will come from God knows where.
Can I interject here?
Yes, do. Please do.
So God knows where. I think the best way to describe this innovation piece or the disruption comes from diversity. I think you need to have multiple people at the table with different ideas from adversity, perhaps. Maybe they have a business problem that they're solving, which they firsthand have gone through. And that's where the alpha comes from. Because you're bringing different perspectives to the table, that creates the innovation.
The alpha comes from diversity.
Yeah,
That's another T-shirt I want.
So I think the figures are, and this is what we say typically, is 30% extra return if you have a diverse C-suite, as an example.
Really?
Yeah, and that's what Simsan's, I guess, even me personally, I'm trying to sort of advocate this, where it's not just women. We look at every non-binary, the race piece, the socioeconomic background piece. All those perspectives are very valuable. You bring them to the table, they all each have their own perspective. That brings forth change, it brings forth innovation, which then disrupts.
Is Standard Chartered, Saif, practicing what Vaishali's preaching?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very important component in terms of from a future sustainable business model. So I think we've started from the board level down to the executive management team level. The tone has to start from the top and then work its way down. But it's just not us. The whole street is doing it, right?
Of course.
The pool of talented, if you want to look at diverse, experienced talent that's out there is limited. So for me, it's about stepping back and saying, how do we start building that from way back at a junior level? When you're recruiting from university or from school. So it's a big issue for us. But if I can pivot from there,
please do. I just had to get your view on that.
No, that's fine, and I'm totally agree. And I think Vaishali is absolutely right there.
Please
pivot. I think from a macro perspective, Sanjay has articulated. We've all heard. The supply chain disruption. We've heard. People mobility, which is becoming a huge issue. And for me, I think that's going to be one of the hotspots that we have to watch going forward, with migration, immigration, illegal immigration, we have to watch that. But also, as a bank, unfortunately, we've come to realize that uncertainty becomes part of our business as usual model. So whether it's, COVID coming in 3 years ago, Russia invading Ukraine, which could have been seen as an isolated event in the east of Europe, has turned out to be a global phenomenon from energy prices going up, which has had an impact on inflation staying at an increased level, which has really come and hurt not just from the West, but all the way into Africa, into Middle East, into the East. So we have to watch that, and we have to work with it, and we have to bake that in.
On inflation, because when you talk about the macroeconomy, inflation is the number one issue.
Yeah.
High interest rates.
Yeah.
Is inflation sticky? How do we deal with it? There's a cost of living crisis everywhere.
Yeah.
Here in the UK, it's a buzz phrase, cost of living crisis. Bank rates are at 5% plus. They're probably going to stay there, even go higher. How do we as nations, India, UK, cope with this very difficult environment, which we haven't really witnessed
this generation,
for generations?
This new generation of
have never seen this.
Don't know what it is, right? They don't understand. I'm born in Zambia, in Africa. My professional career has been spent mainly in Africa and in Asia. 10% inflation was norm, right?
Yeah.
We grew up in that. 20% was something we were used to. But coming to the UK and seeing my colleagues in the US, they don't know what 10% inflation meant, right? It has had an impact right through the economy, including the working class. So I think the inflation question, I think we've seen central banks run very, very stringent measures with interest rates going up. I think it's here to stay for a little while. Until inflation.
Many banks haven't been run so well. They've gone bust in the United States. One big bank in Europe didn't fare so well and was swallowed up by its Swiss partner. We don't need to mention names, but is that just scratching the surface? Saif, you're a bank man, and Are there more to collapse? Are we done with the banking crisis phase of this high? And I love that you're nodding, so we're going to come to you in a second. Are we done with the banking crisis phase, or is that just scratching the surface?
Well, I think it's settled down surely, but I think the one part that we've seen, a new risk that has emerged that everyone is looking now is liquidity risk.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, we've seen credit risk in the past, and we've seen a different global financial crisis. So I think the liquidity risk has come right on top of the agenda in many boardrooms, and you know, we're looking at that. Has the banking crisis ended? Who would have thought about the European bank going down, you know, even a week before that? So unfortunately, I think it's settled down, that's for sure. I think banks have sort of got hold of it. I don't think interest rates per se, the increase was led, I think it was a catalyst.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, we saw that there were some other issues that were pertinent that led to that. So, you know, we'll see how things pan out. But I know the banks are really on top of the liquidity risk also now.
Yeah, Vaishali, you were moving your head animatedly to tell me. What?
It's cyclical, like the macroeconomic trends. Everything's cyclical. If we go back to 07, 08, what did we see? A crisis. Again, I think it's a 10-year period where you see a different change each time. And from that adversity, I think you can have changes which improve. So I guess in response to what you're saying, the crises bring forth something different. I mean, that's one of the reasons why
I guess you're a crisis is an opportunity person, aren't you? You're in that business which is looking for opportunities
well, exactly
in crises.
That. I'm actually a former banker. I spent 10 years across 3 different banks, which I won't name. And what I did
we can find out anyway.
And what I did see was you have legacy systems. I think the previous speaker was talking about legacy systems.
That's right.
And then the changes that you want to put in place, they're not very easy to do. And when we go back to 07, 08, those changes that were brought through regulation made a change. And then they obviously moved on. And 10 years later, we have the same problem.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote a thesis in 07, 08 on the banking crisis.
Did you? What was the summary?
The summary was essentially that you bring profitability and ethics together to create something that's new and it makes a change. So that's what venture does. I left the banking space to join venture in order to make that change.
Were you disillusioned after the GFC, the global financial crisis?
No, I actually started a business in the housing market, ironically, in that time. So that adversity piece allowed me to build a solution to say, okay, let's solve a problem which the world is going through, as you said earlier.
So you're the perfect person to discuss starting a business in a tough macroeconomic environment.
Well, you have to. I mean, it's like a diamond, right? How do we have that beautiful piece of stone or mineral? It comes from pressure. And that's how I think venture is built, where you've got a problem, you solve it, and that's the innovation, and therefore it will build bigger businesses which are even better.
Sanjay, let's talk about India. It grew 6.1%. I love GDP numbers. I'm a real nerd. 6.1% in the 3 months ended March, destroying economists' forecast year on year. 7.2%. That was the fiscal year. So it's on all cylinders. You know, it's destroying its peers. It's leaving the UK in its wake when it comes to growth. However, some of the banks, they're saying that's probably the peak for now. But India's looking good, isn't it? Economically, maybe the next quarter will be slightly challenging for various reasons. But tax collections record high, inflation's easing, foreign exchange reserves are among the largest globally. I mean, India's looking fantastic, isn't it? It's a real... The rest of the world can look at India and say, whoa, what are they doing that we're not doing? Have I done your PR for you?
Yeah.
Is that good enough?
I think we can end right there.
That's it, we're done.
Thank you, yeah.
Goodbye, good night. See you later. We're done.
No, I think in the case of India, it's a confluence of many things that have happened in the last decade, 8-9 years. I mean, if you look at this government, the kind of reforms they have driven, not many structural ones, but just basic things that were stuck and had to happen. So the whole GST implementation, things like the bankruptcy code, a lot more transparency in taxation. So, you know, when you put all that together and combine that with the fact that the government is not necessarily in your way everywhere, and let the private sector really perk up, and doing business become much simpler than before. And we can see it. As investors, we see it through our friends who are in the private sector. And then at the COVID time, I think they did a great job on managing the economy during the COVID phase. So I think that has added on to it. And finally, the infrastructure push by this government, both the digital and the physical, is mammoth. I mean, you can't underestimate the multiplier effect of that. So if you put all of this together, that's where this growth is coming in. So I don't think it's like a flash in the pan. This growth is a real number. Now, whether it goes up to 7.5 or 7, that's up for debate. But I think if you want to sustain this, and India will have to sustain this and maybe even do better, it needs more private sector capital expenditure. Today, the government is the one that is spending most of the money, so we need the private sector to get crowded in. I think we do need more of the trade deals cross-border because, as I said, in a deglobalizing world, we have to also find the right kind of market access, both ways, of course. And then I suppose, we have to manage this whole energy transition and climate transition, which is a challenge for India. But again, I think seeing the way this government gets focused on things, they get it done. You just look at the Prime Minister's visit to US. It's not about corporate deals. It's all about critical and emerging technologies. Yeah. If you look at just the gist of the whole thing, a very strategic visit just talking about all kinds of technology as it pertains from climate to solar to supply chain. So yeah, I think, we've got all engines firing. I just think we'll have to stay very hawkish on the fiscal side. The fiscal side still is pretty large, but that's a legacy. At least this government has not expanded it. They're managing. They're quite hawkish about fiscal, which is good. But ultimately, we'll have to bring the government debt down, and I think that's where capital from this part of the world is required in infrastructure, in asset monetization. So there's a lot of opportunities in India, even for foreign capital.
You're a bank, Saif. You're obviously at Standard Chartered. People think, oh, it's sort of Asia, but you're UK, you're CEO, UK regional head, you're a global bank. How can you, as a bank, as a lender, how can you collaborate with like-minded Indian institutions to boost the financial sector? What collaborative initiatives can you work on together?
So in India, we have a very large business from an international bank perspective. Obviously, it's a huge market. We have over 100 branches all over India. We're a huge player on the debt capital markets, both in local currency, foreign currency. So we can say all that. Just to add on to what Sanjay was saying, that on the renewable side, India today is, I think, the third largest user of electricity or power, but they are also the third largest renewable energy provider in the world. Yeah. So that journey has already started. So we feel that first of all, the corridor into India, be it UK into India, Europe into India, or what we bring in terms of our own network in Asia, so ASEAN into India, is huge. We've already worked with many private sector companies where we've brought them into India, brought them with like-minded partners. We've financed up to, I think, just under 5.5 gigawatts of power already from a renewable perspective. So this is what we feel that we can bring separately in terms of everything else that we do from a normal banking proposition. Yeah. The digital agenda is huge in India. I have to read you some stats because it's really, really amazing. I know Sanjay will know this well, but I think 14 years ago, only 17% of Indian adults had bank accounts. Today, it's over 90%. 1 in 25 had a unique ID. Today, there's over 1 billion people that have digital ID, and only 37% 14 years ago had mobile phones. And today you're looking at again over 90%. Yeah. That brings huge opportunity from the digital agenda perspective, right? And in terms of access to banking accounts, access to different platforms, and for us, it's a huge opportunity. I think the last 3 years, India has used the COVID transition, although it was tough, but by having a stable government, good fiscal discipline, I think it's really propelled itself. There's no doubt about it. So it's about, as Sanjay said, staying the course. I think keeping that vision and moving forward is the most important thing.
And Vaishali, we're talking about digital opportunities. You started this wonderful panel off by talking about deep tech and fintech and all the wonderful things you're investing in. So what's exciting you right now in these fields?
I think to my fellow colleagues, point, you have the idea of technology, and it's often seen as alien. And what we're looking at is a split. So we look at fintech and deep tech, and there's a reason for that. So as India's doing so well, with Simsan, we have the incorporation of UK, Europe, India, and South Korea. So what we're doing is building a cross-border tech alliance. So we're trying to take the innovations from each of these different jurisdictions to make a change, to build businesses that are strong and obviously impact the GDP. So just to give India's example, the idea of fintech, there's a lot going on there, and there's also a market which is untapped. And I'm not sure if the guys can mention the numbers here, because I've moved from the banking space, but there are so many unbanked people in that nation still in the rural areas. That in itself is an opportunity. And just to add another facet, the South Korean piece, we're building a border between the two where there's an open call for fintech solutions. And even though they're great in the deep tech space, the fintech side is an open call from Indian banks, from European, from UK banks to bring in their technology over. So I think as a holistic view, it's the sharing of technologies across border. What I would say in terms of the type of technology, we've recently invested in an EV charging startup, which is trying to make waves in obviously the charging battery systems. And that is a big thing when it comes to energy. Obviously, cost of living crisis across the globe with the inflation piece, trying to solve that. So that's one. AI is the elephant in the room.
Of course.
One thing I will add to that is hybrid technologies. You can talk about ChatGPT or any of the models like DaVinci, but what about the technologies that come together? So deep tech and fintech together, where you might have a financial solution which has AI incorporated. For example, let's say SCB have the advisory piece. What if the advisors are robots who are giving advice on the sort of market trends and then investing proprietary for a company? So those kinds of things. So the hybrid piece is an interesting one.
Yeah, wonderful panelists. I have to wrap it up. The time police is in my ear saying, wrap it up. So I'm wrapping it up. But you are absolutely fantastic. I wish we had more time, but the time we spent was absolutely wonderful, informative and entertaining as well. Sanjay, Saif and Vaishali, big round of applause.